And we're live. I'm not
All
even going to bother
right.
checking stuff if anybody gets on and tells me there's problems. We'll figure it out. We're back at the Tao of Talk with an episode with Cannaman Don today, and we're going to be talking about criminal justice reform. I guess we're going to be hovering around that topic.
Yeah.
Um, so I want to pass it over to Don. Don, you're welcome to introduce yourself any way you want, and then maybe we'll just start, or maybe we want to go from introductions into the topic. Maybe that'll work too.
Sure. Okay. Well, my name is Don. Go by Cannaman and have for quite a few years online. You can find me at BlueSky mainly, uh, and that's my name on there is Cannaman Don. I was a corrections officer for 7 years with Arkansas Department of Corrections, and so I've got a pretty good hold on the problems that I saw with my own eyes with the justice system. And I've been looking for a platform for a while uh, to be able to express those and what I see are potential fixes. And so, first, I want to thank you for opening up this platform for me to get these ideas out there.
Hmm.
But
Well, we're
yeah,
good friends, so yeah, that's. I I'm always welcome to have you here anytime. So yeah, and it's gonna be cool going wandering down this with you. So, anyways.
so when I was younger, I lived in a very rural part of Arkansas, and pretty much the only jobs around were Walmart, rice farms, or the local prison that they had just built. I had done security, unarmed security, since I was graduated high school. It was just the easy job to get, an easy job to maintain, and I liked being up all night, so it worked out great. And then I moved to from where I was living then to a place my wife and I at the time had, and that's when the jobs became scarce. And so I was like, well, I've got all the security background. Maybe I'm qualified to be a corrections officer. And turns out that I was. So I took that job and I started off, went through academy. Um, we had 12 weeks of academy. I don't know how many hours that works out to. And that consisted of everything from knowing the inmates' rights to protecting your rights to report writing to um, physical restraint and self defense, chemical weapons, uh, and ending with firearms. And all of us were required to qualify with a 12 gauge shotgun, and I was selected to be part of the team that also qualified with handguns and ARs. And so a qualified expert with all of my munitions as well as the chemical weapons training. And my first uh, assignment was the segregation unit at a men's medium to maximum security prison in Newport, Arkansas. It was the Grimes and McPherson compound. And I worked at the Grimes prison, which was the men's unit. And the McPherson prison on the same compound was the women's unit. It was a privatized prison run by a company at the time known as Wackenhut Corrections Corporation. Being young and not politically active at all, I didn't know what a privatized prison even was, let alone the myriad of problems that produces. But I found out later, and honestly felt a little bit of guilt for helping to perpetuate that system. But at the same time, I was also stuck between a rock and a hard place, and I had babies at home, and they needed food. So working at the prison was what it was. Um, so I started in the segregation unit. It was 45 inmates, all of them locked in their cells 23 hours a day, and commonly known as the hole. So the baddest of the bad. It's jail when you're in prison.
Mm.
I went from there to a housing unit that had um, 7 pods. Um, each pod, well, they had varying populations, but minimum was 60, and the most we had in one single pod was double that, so 120. There were roughly 600 inmates in my side of the prison that I was responsible for once I moved to a housing unit. And as a CO, they gave me 3 pods. Uh, so I had Charlie, Delta, and Echo, housing unit 1, or C, D, and E for anybody who doesn't understand a phonetic alphabet. C, D, and E. C was class 2 and 3 inmates, so people that follow the rules part of the time. It was 2 men's cells, 2 tiers. D was ADSEG, 2 men's cells, 2 tiers, but just like the whole, it was just much bigger. So 120 people in the whole in this one particular unit.
When you
And
say
then
2 men's cells, do you mean two different cells with multiple men in them, or 2 men per cell, or what do you mean there?
2 men per cell,
Okay,
30
gotcha.
cells per tier, 60 in total for 2 tiers.
Wow. Mm. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
And then,
Just wanted
oh, it's
clarification.
okay. And then Echo was also constructed with the 62 men cells, but they were open door. So the inmates were allowed to come in and out except for lockdown at night.
Mm.
After a few months of, I guess, good performance with that, uh, I was promoted to a sergeant within my first year. And that made me responsible for a housing unit. And they moved me from housing 2 to housing 1, where I had all 7 of the pods under my direct supervision, but also had officers to delegate that authority to. And the only pod that was personally mine was Alpha, and they were class 1 and 2 inmates. So half of these inmates would leave and go work in the community, and the other half would go to college courses or something like that. And that's where I met my most famous inmate. Um, for those of you who are older, like I am, may have heard of the Memphis Three. They were wrongfully convicted of a couple of murders in West Memphis um, back in the 80s, I think. And Jason Alexander was one of the members. Damian Eccles was the other member, and I can't remember the third. Uh, but I had Jason Alexander at my facility. And if I were to judge his guilt or innocence by the way he conducted himself in that prison, I would say this boy wouldn't have even been in the state when those 2 children were killed because he was a model inmate, class 1A. Only his charges kept him from being able to work in the community. He kept his self neat, he kept his area neat. Uh, I never had to write him up for an infraction. He always listened, he always did what he was asked. And when you have an inmate like that, you don't have to tell them what to do. You get to ask them, and you know they'll comply as long as your questions are reasonable. So, and I did that, and I worked at many different areas in the prison, both as a CO and a sergeant. We had a medical unit that I'd staff from time to time. Central control, housing control, visitation. There wasn't a position I worked there um, that was there that I didn't work
that
at.
you didn't work. Yeah.
So during all that, I got to know 1,200 people on a rotating basis. It wasn't always the same 12 because people came in and people got out. But and you get a chance to talk to them with 12-hour shifts. There's not a lot that needs to happen in a prison, believe it or not, especially if you're working overnight. Mainly all that needs to happen then is sleep. And so I would get to know some of the inmates, and I found people that grew up in the same town as me. I found people that graduated from the same high school as I did. I found people born on the same day at the same time in the same hospital just down the hallway from me. And so there was no division between me and those inmates in my eyes. And as a matter of fact, one of the things that I think made me the most successful as an officer is on my first day in a new place, I would give them all the same speech. None of you guys are here for singing too loud in church. You and I both know that. The only difference I see between you and me is you got caught and I haven't. So all I'm going to ask of you guys is just to follow the rules that you know you have to follow and make my paperwork as small a stack as possible at the end of the night.
Mm,
And I never had any problems.
mm, mm.
As a matter of fact, I happen to know of one really large, violent fight that was put off until my shift ended because
Mm,
I asked him to.
mm, mm.
So I had a
That's
good rapport with the inmate, and I wasn't a power trip kind of guy, which anytime you have a position of authority, it's going to attract those type of people.
mm,
But I got to know them, and they're, believe it or not, and this may come as a shock to some people that may listen or watch this in the future, they are people too. Most of them
yeah.
just made a simple mistake that you wouldn't even judge them as needing to go to prison for, but somebody in the past has made it a crime.
Yeah.
And for example, I know a guy who grew marijuana. It's against the law. He knew it when he did it. He did not possess any firearms in conjunction with the marijuana. He wasn't selling it. He wasn't intending to sell it. He told me that the only reason he grew it is so he wouldn't have to buy it anymore. And he got caught.
Mm,
And when he got charged, they charged him with a Class D felony. In Arkansas, the lower the letter in the alphabet, the worse the felony.
mm,
So the only other worse crime in Arkansas, as far as the penal code is concerned, was manslaughter or murder. So this guy was busted for growing two marijuana plants,
mm,
and they wanted to lock him up for 12 years.
mm.
That was the sentence they were looking for, was 12 years
Yeah.
in prison. And all he did was plant two seeds.
Yeah. That seems
I don't
inordinate.
see I don't see the logic in that.
Yeah, me neither.
I mean, obviously, he knew that it was illegal. He may not have known the punishment for it. But one of the reasons for harsh sentencing is deterrence.
Mm,
That's one of the reasons that we've been given for changing these laws to make the sentences harsher. It will deter crime. And not once has it ever deterred crime.
yeah. Mm,
People know that you might go to prison for life or even be put to death if you kill someone, but that hasn't stopped people from killing.
yeah.
People know that possession of cocaine is an immediate prison sentence,
Mm,
especially if it's crack cocaine. But we still have crack. We still have cocaine.
mm. Yeah.
So it kind of proves that a harsher sentence is not a deterrent. Yet people keep running on that platform, they keep getting elected. And then, in order to look tough on crime, they make it tough on people. And the people that support folks that do things like that, I feel are ignorant. And when I say ignorant, it's not an insult. Ignorance is simply not knowing something. And you shouldn't take any shame on not knowing something unless you're trying to avoid knowledge
Mm, mm,
for some reason.
yeah. Mm,
So people are ignorant of the real harm that our penal system in America causes. They either applaud or don't understand how one small offense like this gentleman that I was just talking about committed. He grew 2 marijuana plants. Now it's hard for him to find employment, so he stays in the welfare system. I hate that word, but that's what I'm going to use.
yeah, sure.
Um, it's hard for him to get housing because now you get to do criminal background checks, which I can see a reason for. I wouldn't want to live next to someone who registers as an SO just to be YouTube friendly. Um, and if I have a choice, I won't.
Mm,
But at the same time, there are people out there like that guy who'd probably be the best neighbor you'd ever met. But you'll never know because he can't be your neighbor
yeah.
and he
Yeah.
can't work at your workplace. And in some places, if you have a drug conviction, whether it's possession or manufacturing or any sort whatsoever, they keep you from getting public services.
Mm,
So it's like the entire state turned their back on this man for growing medicine, for growing 2 plants that should have never been illegal to begin with. And so that man, he's told me he feels the hypocrisy of the drug laws. And the biggest one is marijuana for medical purposes is now legal in Arkansas. Yet he is still a criminal
mm-hmm.
in Arkansas for growing it.
Yeah. Well, plus obviously the medical benefits that are proving out. I mean, the particular diagnosis I have strongly backs supports that marijuana is or cannabis is effective at alleviating a lot of the symptoms of what I have.
Right?
So,
And same.
yeah,
I'm a medical user myself.
exactly.
Um, I started having seizures when I was 35 on my birthday. It was my brain's gift to me.
Mm.
Here, let's tense all of your muscles and uh, make you jerk around and look kind of foolish in front of your whole family. Happy birthday.
Yeah.
And I went on pharmaceuticals, anticonvulsants for that. And due to paperwork mix ups with insurance, I ended up losing my medical coverage.
Mm.
And I had to choose no anticonvulsants or marijuana. And after studying it, I chose marijuana. And since I have lived in a state for almost a decade now with that had medical marijuana laws for me when I moved here and then passed recreational which kind of made the medical card null and void.
Mm.
I haven't had a seizure in a decade.
Mm. 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 Well, that's pretty
And
remarkable, I think.
it's enough of a success story for me. Number one, not to ever move from the state I'm living in now for chance of losing these rights. And number two, to try to still work very hard federally to get these laws changed. I was an activist in Arkansas when I lived there, and the laws changed and didn't cover my conditions, and so I moved.
Mm.
But
Mm.
it's kind of tangential. So
Yeah, I was going to say we
anyway,
could probably do a whole show on cannabis, but back to criminal justice reform. I just wanted to call out a few things, like your story. Thank you. That was pretty awesome. Uh, Rendition of that story. So thank you so much. I appreciate it. So it was funny because Billy, the conversation with Billy I had a week or so ago, his message was don't treat people with mental illness as, don't judge them. You got to treat them as people. You can't prejudge them based on what their affects are. And I think I extrapolate the same message from what you're saying. It's like often people fall into the criminal justice system for reasons that most people might consider like what the heck are you doing here and why is your sentence so harsh, and not to mention all the other things that add in, like we know that there are you end up going into places that are bad and you take on more charges just by being inside and defending yourself, you know.
yeah.
So all those things are kind of malignant notions there. But I agree. Like I told you I worked in a prison as well for, I think it was less than a year. But
Hmm.
my overt message there is similar. Is like if you treat them with respect, if you treat them with as people, there are certain people there that are beyond help. Of course, we lived
Yeah,
with lifers. Some were, you know, not coming out of the prison ever in their lives, and they were there because of murder or whatever, whatever the case may be, deadly assault, repeated. So whatever that is, yeah, there are people but most of them in there I found were generally misunderstood,
hmm,
abused, heavily abused people. Like,
hmm,
whatever experiences that they had in their lives was just sheer abuse, and that's probably what made them fall into the criminal justice system.
correct.
Um, and then, yeah, over a plant. That's just ridiculous to me. Um,
It is over a decade of a man's life for two marijuana plants.
yeah,
It's not like he had a field. It's not like he was selling. He wasn't giving it to children. He was growing for personal use, and they want to take a decade of this man's life for that.
yeah, yeah.
And that leads me into what I think is one of the largest problems with our criminal justice system, and that's mandatory minimum sentencing.
Mm,
Um, they remove judicial discretion and impose a fixed sentence that a judge has to go by.
mm,
And for some reason, they've been written to disproportionately affect low level nonviolent offenders, especially drug crimes. Um, it increases the population in prisons with no clear deterrent, like we spoke about earlier. It reduces the incentives for rehabilitation and contributes to racial disparities. If I don't know what your time in a prison looked like, but I lived in a mostly white state, and when I looked at my inmates, that's not what I saw.
yeah.
The breakdown at the Newport Grimes facility was 95% African American,
Mm,
3% white, 1% Asian, and 1% other.
mm. Interesting.
Now, in a state with mostly white people, why is it mostly black people are the ones locked up when they commit crimes at roughly the same ratio?
Yeah. I think I looked up the statistics. It's something like uh, African American, black people, whatever you want to call them, will be incarcerated 6 times more likely than a white person or something like that. I don't
Absolutely.
I don't know if that's, yeah, I don't know how. Don't hold my feet to the fire to any statistics. I'm going off my memory, and my memory's bad, but it was some crazy statistic like that, it's resounding to me because that's my experience in the prison I worked at. Actually, most of the COs were black as well.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, it was a very heavily not white place. Um,
Wow.
so Yeah, it was
Our
interesting
staff
though.
was mostly white,
Hmm.
believe it or not.
Hmm. Yeah, well, I guess, it was this place is closer to Washington, D.C. It's between the Washington, Baltimore metropolitan area, and there's a lot of diversity in those areas. And of course, I think the system is stacked against minorities. So,
Right? So when it comes to mandatory minimums, what can we do about it? Well, we can repeal or reform the laws, and that would restore judicial discretion to where a judge can look and say, okay, this guy's got an ounce of weed. That's against the law. That's the amount that our state has set to jump it from misdemeanor to felony. But these are the circumstances. This is what led him to his marijuana use. And maybe this guy should go to rehab and not carry a felony conviction for the rest of his life.
mm.
But mandatory minimums take that away from judges.
Well, do
States
you?
like New Jersey and New York have reformed their drug sentencing laws, and in return, saw significant drops in prison populations without increases in crime.
Mm, mm. So I think this is also related to the fact that cannabis is I think it was Schedule 1 for a long time, wasn't it? And now is it Schedule 2?
It's still Schedule One as far as I know.
Mm.
The
I thought
Biden
they had dropped the
administration,
scheduling, but yeah.
well, he instructed the DEA to look into the scheduling, and then it almost didn't go anywhere for his entire term.
Mm, mm, mm.
And so, as far as I know, it's still Schedule One. And for those who don't know, Schedule One, the only substances on Schedule One is considered high risk for abuse and no medicinal value.
Mm-hmm.
So, in the United States, marijuana is more dangerous and more addictive than heroin, when in reality, marijuana is non addictive. And the only way you're going to die from it is if a bale of that stuff falls on you.
Yeah, I've heard that same joke before. That's a good one. Yeah, so the scheduling is probably what makes the disproportionate consequences, I would say, federally.
It does. It
Um,
does. They actually, when you're scheduled for a drug offense, let's say you're busted with cocaine, they use some sort of mathematical formula they came up with, and they equate your weight in cocaine to weight in marijuana
mm,
and sentence you according to that.
hmm,
So they have demonized marijuana or cannabis to the point in the US where it is worse than one of the most addictive drugs out there. Cocaine and heroin are Schedule 2, whereas marijuana is Schedule 1.
yeah, yeah. Well, to wrap this back around to the law, the criminal justice system, this is why those consequences, those convictions, the what is it called when the judge gives you your sentencing, why the sentencings are so harsh, I think. And it also prevents medical research, things like that. But,
It does.
but just to keep it in the realm of law, this is also a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? If cannabis is illegal, if we can pull people in on simple infraction, well, I guess technically not simple infractions according to the law federally, but if we can be arbitrary about that, target minorities because we have privatized prisons that need bodies in order to make profit,
Mhm.
um, that just seems a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy for me. It seems like not a healthy situation.
Well,
Um,
it's the school to prison pipeline that we've heard about in every state in the country. There's not a single state that isn't affected by it,
yeah.
and it is generally minorities that are targeted. Anybody with more melanin than you or I have.
Hmm, hmm, hmm. Let me ask you a question because it was something that I witnessed. And, of course, I got some secondhand stories about things. I can only qualify them so far, but things I heard and things I witnessed about corruption going on in the prison that I was in, which was not a privatized prison.
Oh,
It was a government, a public facility.
mhm.
So, but there was like what I witnessed was it was a heavily corrupt system from practically top to bottom.
Absolutely.
What are your feelings of that within the system that you worked?
Well, in the hip hop world, they refer to rappers from the South as Dirty South. And you can add that to law enforcement and Department of Corrections, in my opinion, as well. It was a good old boys club. You didn't get past sergeant at the prison that I worked at if you weren't a duck hunter, because that's what the warden liked to do.
Hmm. Building
And so if you
fiefdoms, huh?
wanted to yeah, yeah, if you wanted to advance, you had to go duck hunting with the warden. I was made sergeant purely out of necessity. There is now and always has been a extreme shortage of corrections officers. They need them, and it doesn't pay too badly. So, to anybody listening, if you're interested, if you're a humanitarian and not power tripping, then definitely apply to your state Department of Corrections. Go in there and remind those inmates that they're people too,
Hmm.
and you can have a rewarding career as a corrections officer. You really can.
Yeah, you
But
can. Like you
yeah,
can also be subject to the corruption.
absolutely.
So
And I do have
that's
a story. I was working at the prison system when tobacco was taken away. So first from the inmates, and then later from the guards, which I thought was terrible. Uh, so we had a guard after no tobacco was allowed to be brought in the facility who was bringing in top rolling tobacco. If nobody's familiar or somebody's not familiar, it's shredded tobacco leaves in a foil pouch and you roll your own cigarettes with them. So this guy was buying these pouches for 89 cents a pouch at the time and bringing them into the prison, which is a felony offense. Then he was selling them to inmates for $5 a pouch in green money, which the prisoners are not allowed to possess. They didn't have currency, they had paper checks and a bank account that was administered by the prison system. So that was how they were allowed to trade. So when they came in and were they were being smuggled cash to buy contraband with, and this corrections officer was bringing in contraband, and he seemed to be very braggadocious about it. And then I came in one weekend for my shift, and he didn't show, and I didn't care. And I found out about a month later that not only was he fired, he was also arrested on the spot, charged with felony of bringing contraband into a prison, convicted, and I was still there when he was an inmate in the very prison he was an officer in.
hmm. It it makes me wonder because I always go to the place of these days. Like I've kind of left my judgmental phase, and I kind of go to the place of like I wonder what they experienced in their lives to make them act that way. What kind of pressures were they subject to that, did somebody teach them that it's okay to mess with a system, to try and to try and do what you can to get away with things, as far as you can get away with them. And then something hits me and it's like it resonates. It's like, that's kind of what our system is, our economy is here. It's
Mm-hmm.
like what's legal is what you can get away with,
True.
right? It's only illegal if you get caught, if you will, you know. Um,
And if I were to look for a place to put the blame instead of that officer, I would definitely look at economics.
yeah,
He
yeah,
was looking to gain money
yeah,
because that's
probably.
that's that's what he was bringing out of it.
I agree.
So if the money had been addressed previously, You know, and I'm saying if he was earning enough, he wouldn't have been attempted to do the crime.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, look, I level myself with saying I know there are people out there that are gonna do things that are malignantly narcissistic, whatever, and or
Mhm.
psychopathic or sociopathic or whatever the the classification might be. But I think technically we know that the thing of that happening from a genotypical standpoint are so rare. Like
Mhm.
the rest of people are just being, it's their experiences that are pushing them to these boundaries of, these behaviors. Yeah, it's really interesting. I think I told you the one about mine. Did you? The most notorious one of my experience was when Mike Tyson went through the prison while I was there.
Yes, you did. You mentioned that.
Yeah, and the guards would like other and he had a special cell. Like I heard stories of him ripping a television off the wall and throwing it at a CO and not being punished for it. I heard a story about them bringing in outside food, which they generally just don't do. And that's
Hmm.
like that's just like the public facing news, right? That's not even all the other shit going on behind the scenes in that place that I could tell you stories of. I could only
Oh
tell you
yeah.
that they're secondhand stories. They're people that I sat down with, and in my nature, I'm an inquisitive person. I ask them, and they're like, "Oh, here's a story," and it's like, "Whoa, really?"
Yeah, I've got a
um,
few of those low reallys myself.
yeah. So, well, go ahead. Let's hear another one. Let's bounce back and forth a bit.
Okay. Well, I guess let me tell you about my exit. The reason why I left being a corrections officer. I was a sergeant and I was running a housing unit and there was something off. And when you're a CO, you can feel it. There's a difference in the atmosphere, kind of an electricity, and you know something's going to happen. And so I got with my team of brand new corrections officers. Every one of them was a rookie. And I told them, I said, let me explain. There's an intercom on the wall that I could use to talk to my housing control officer to get them to open doors if for some reason my radio wasn't functioning. And so I got with my team that day and I told them, don't listen to this intercom. My radio is working fine. Don't open any doors unless you have express permission from me. And I'm serious, if one of the other floor COs asks you to open a door, you radio me first, and then you open the door. All of this was to keep my officers safe, to keep the other inmates safe, so that we could all go home at the end of the night. One during a mass movement where inmates were going from one area to another, whether it be school, a work assignment, visitation, whatever. One of the inmates got a hold of the intercom and asked for a pod door to be open, and she did it. At that point in time, somebody entered that pod with a shank or a homemade knife and stabbed another inmate,
Mm.
I think 16 or so times. Not fatal, and it really just kind of pissed this other guy off, is all it did. So we have two inmates that run out of that particular pod into the hallway between housing units where myself, my female lieutenant who looked like everybody's grandma, if that gives you a good mental picture, my captain, and my major were. So this very this very bloody inmate runs past us for protection. This other one without a shirt on comes out with a knife in his hand with a shank. And the guy with the shank appeared at the time to be the aggressor. We found out later he was actually the victim, was able to wrestle the shank from his aggressor and gave as good as he was trying to get.
Mm.
So this guy says, I'm going to cut one of you mother effers for letting him in my house. That's what they called their pod. and he was closest to my female lieutenant. He was agitated, he was wide eyed, he was shaky, and so I edged up close to him. And in order to protect my fellow officers and myself, when he lunged towards my lieutenant, I punched him in his throat
Mm.
and he crumpled. And we all went home that night. And that was my last night.
Mm. Meaning, I think I know the end here, but do you mind saying what happened at that point?
I retired after that when I had nightmares of seeing my own grandmother stabbed to death in a prison.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Mm. So how deep do you think that the controversy, or not the contro, but the how deep did the roots of that go? Was that a CO cooperating as well to have inmates attack each other?
It appeared that the original aggressor inmate grew up in the same neighborhood as the woman in housing control
Mm, mm,
and was able to either get some dirt on her or get her to sympathize with him so that he could carry out this act of aggression.
mm,
And
mm.
so she was fired. There was no charges that could be levied against her, but she was just as guilty, in my opinion, of assault as the inmate who went into the pod with the shank.
Mm, mm. Crazy. Mm,
And she was fired because she acted directly against my orders.
yeah.
So, yeah, that's how something so simple as even accidentally pressing a button in a prison, as they are today, could cost someone their life.
Yeah. Mm.
But
Well, yeah,
yeah,
that's crazy. Mm.
so to get back to bring us back to the criminal justice reform, one thing that could have stopped that is the getting rid of the mandatory sentencing and giving those judges their discretion back to maybe not saddle somebody with a permanent record that follows them the rest of their life or um, puts them in a situation where they might have to commit a crime just to defend themselves so they can live.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so we changed prisons in the U.S. in the 60s and 70s during a big reform period during the civil rights era. And if you've noticed, there are very few new facilities that are named penitentiaries.
Mm.
They're all named prisons or correctional facility.
Right, right.
The reasoning behind that change is if you look it up, a penitentiary is for punishment.
Hmm. Being penitent. Yep.
And yeah, and when we lock people away from society today, it's supposed to be for rehabilitation so that they can learn to be a productive member of society. And that is a model I can support.
Yeah,
But most
rehabilitation. Yeah.
prisons, yeah, most prisons today still focus on punishment, not rehabilitation. There's not enough access to education, job training, real world skills, and psychotherapy is limited or almost non existent.
Mm, mm.
These are all things that law abiding people need to become productive members of society. So, in a rehabilitative model for a prison, why aren't we focusing on those things?
Yeah. And when people are done serving their sentence, why do they continue to be punished when they're released? Which is
Exactly.
a self-fulfilling prophecy in and of itself, which we already talked about, is, now you go out, you're a felon or whatever it is, and on applications for jobs, you have to put that you're a felon and nobody's going to hire you.
Hmm.
Or you get stuck with the shittiest paying, shittiest hours, shittiest, crappiest job you can possibly think of.
Right.
Um, the whole thing is just nonsensical to me.
Well, they're released without the tools they need to reintegrate, and
Yeah,
halfway houses are supposed to provide that, but they don't.
yeah.
It's just it's another jail.
Well, this is the same notion of, say, for instance, our economy, right? There
Hmm.
there are enough people who are successful in our economy to validate to most, I guess, to enough people to say that our economy is successful enough of a strategy.
Hmm.
The fact that we have some people who do end up getting rehabilitated and leave the system and be functional, even though it's a small proportion of people, is enough for some people to say, well, just pull up your bootstraps and do better. And that just
Well, it is a
dismisses,
small.
yeah, that just dismisses all the other circumstances that are occurring within that process that stop all the other people from achieving those goals, you know?
Well,
Um,
I have the figures to show you how small of a statistic of people who are actually rehabilitated are, because 67% of inmates are rearrested in 3 years.
yeah, yeah, recidivism is real bad.
Recidivism, it's extremely high,
Hmm.
and it's a direct result of the lack of access to education, job trainings, life skills,
Yep,
and therapy.
I agree.
Uh, and that's a direct indictment of the new model.
Mm,
It's not being, it's a good idea, but it's not being implemented correctly. And there's so much corruption. The officer I talked about who was selling tobacco, that's low rung. What is the warden doing? What's the assistant warden doing? There was a prison in Arkansas, Tucker, whose warden during the 60s was ordering like cases of Hormel chili
mm,
to feed the inmates and then selling it to local grocery stores, undercutting the wholesalers that the grocery stores usually bought their supplies from, and pocketing that money. So he was stealing directly not only from the inmates, but from the state whose money he was using to buy the chili.
mm. It brings up like memories of Shawshank Redemption because a lot of, with the pies, the whole pie transfer situation was kind of that similar, like under the covers, back scratching to see who gets contracts, who doesn't get contracts, who supports what economy, or what fiefdom of people within the economy.
Absolutely.
Um,
Absolutely. That scene when I first saw it rang so true to me, and I've had no reason to doubt it since.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But
That's really
so
interesting.
what we could do, what can we do about it? We could invest in prison education and drop job training and reduce the recidivism dramatically. I'm thinking up to 40% or so.
Well, I got some bad news.
Ah,
The current administration isn't going to get any better with any of that stuff. It probably
oh,
is going
oh
to
no,
get
that's
worse.
true.
Um,
Absolutely.
I would bring up something though that gives me positive hope is like I like the work that Robert Sapolsky, if I don't like celebrity worship syndrome. I don't like, I like to
Mm,
temper myself with being a fanboy over anybody. But if there were anybody out there I were a fanboy of, it's Robert Sapolsky, and he does work with the criminal justice system, working with the courts, working with the judges to, and the juries to make them aware of cognitive biases that we have and don't even we're not
mm.
even aware of. It's unconscious behavior like the hungry judge effect, for instance,
Oh yeah.
where if it's statistically pretty informative that judges give worse sentences if they're hungry and they give better sentences if they've just eaten.
Oh
So
yeah. If I get
that
a
kind of
speeding ticket,
thing,
I want a
yeah.
9 a.m. court date.
Yeah. So he goes around and slaps various judges and jury members and says, "Get your head out of your butt. Stop thinking this stuff. Think about the things that this person that brought this person to this moment in their life. Don't
Yes.
think about what they did." And that goes into a whole bunch of philosophical topics actually over like free will and such, which Robert Sapolsky is a hard determinist, so he is a anti-free will person. He does not believe it
Hmm.
exists. So yeah, so in that with no free will, there's no judgment, there's no blame, there's no shame, there's no acclaim, there's no none of that, and that is all the stuff that I think causes this inordinate amount of injustice, in these circumstances, is that notion of just nearsighted blame of people to say, I mean, it goes into even the victims of people who were, excuse me, the relatives of the people who are victims. Somebody got killed. Now I feel really bad about it. I want them to have really harsh sentences. I want them burned at the stake. I want them to suffer before they die.
Exactly.
This is kind of like the history of what's built us up, I think, to our legal system today. And we still have a lot of that ingrained bias that's still in there. Plus, having systems like privatized jails who need populace in order to make a profit. So
Hmm.
it's a reverberative system of capturing the minorities on simple infractions and then keeping them in the system so we can generate money. I think
It
that's
is.
absolutely a factor here. So, yeah.
And since I left my career in corrections, I've looked at different prison systems in different countries, and I'd have to say that um, ours, fortunately or unfortunately, however you look at it, isn't the most appalling.
Mm,
But one of the best I've seen is Norway.
yeah, yeah. Hmm.
They emphasize rehab and dignity,
Hmm.
and their recidivism rate is below 20%. And if that's not good evidence that we should do the same here to keep our to put our recidivism rate down,
Hmm.
I don't know what is.
Well, I agree. There's a lot of positive studies coming out of the Scandinavian countries, various ones, and actually, it's also positive to know that we are trying some of those projects here. They're very small. Most people don't know them. Most people will probably see them as objectionable because they're not criminalizing people for their bad behaviors, or treating them inhumanely and supporting them with the minimum amount of money from the public funding as possible. Um, they'll be fought, but some of those projects are happening here, and that's good to see. Like that's the opposing side. That's kind of what Casey was talking about yesterday. Is there are some hopes within our legal system. Like that whole Hawaiian situation with the natives and showing support for the indigenous cultures there, and helping them out of generational problems. The whole thing about Billy and his stream with the mental health facility. I mean, there were people there who had criminal infractions, but
Mhm.
hopefully we're also detecting that these criminal infractions are caused by mental unwellness and maybe need to be addressed in a mental facility and not a hard prison where you have to go fight for your life and fight against people who are corrupt and only aim to serve their own means.
Exactly.
So
Exactly. Our current prison
yeah.
system, the one thing that one of the things I noticed was you come in a low level offender, you had possession of some cocaine or some crack or something like that, and you get a 1 to 6 year sentence, you do 2 to 3, and you leave prison educated as a better criminal, not educated in anything
Yeah,
that would
yeah,
help society, but educated. You come in possessing crack, you leave knowing how to make it.
yeah. I could definitely see it in that realm of schooling for black market activities for making money easily.
Absolutely.
Um, yeah, and all the other bad behaviors that come along with it.
Right.
So actually,
So,
this is. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
oh no, go ahead.
No, I was going to say we're coming up on an hour now. And like, unless you wanted to, yeah, if you have more stuff to say, I'm not going anywhere, so we can talk as long as you want. But if you want, we could see if anybody down there has any questions and wants to come up here and ask some questions. We could ask. I don't know.
Yeah, I have a few more points, but I'm
Absolutely, go
happy
for
to
it.
take questions too.
No,
Okay.
go for it, man. Let's continue.
All right. Well, one of the things that I see to be a major problem that a lot of people think is a good opportunity, and that's the cash bail system. Um,
Mm, mm,
it leads us right back to economics that if you're wealthy enough, the
yeah,
consequences don't matter much.
yeah. I
You
agree.
know,
I mean, they're already in bad circumstances, and that's what, for the most part, and that's what's making them commit the crimes. So now they got to commit a crime just to pay the bail. Or,
exactly,
yeah, it's like,
exactly, and And it doesn't matter whether or not they're a flight risk or a danger to society, which is the premise that the system was set up to begin with.
Yeah.
Is if they're not a danger, they're not a flight risk, then they can pay, a little $10 bail and get out.
Mm.
And with price increases and fines and so on and so forth, that's ballooned to where I think I haven't heard of a crime you can be arrested for that it doesn't cost you $500 or more to get out of.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
And when 70% of our country would be devastated by a $400 emergency, it just follows that a $500 bail is going to devastate a lot of families.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And $500 bail on what could be possession of a quarter ounce of marijuana or um, shoplifting. And shoplifting isn't right, it's wrong for sure. Is it a jailable offense? I wouldn't think so.
Mm. 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 Well, and there's
And
there I
so,
think there's another interesting statistic out there that I heard. It's like something like 60% of people in the United States are like one missed paycheck away from falling into financial disaster. So it's
oh,
like
yeah,
just it's an illusion of financial security as long as things continue the way they do. You know what I mean?
right.
Um,
And so, what does the cash bail system, how does it impact people? Well, innocent people will plead guilty just to get out of jail.
mm,
Say, okay, well, I'll give up my rights, and I'll plead guilty to this if all I'm going to get's a fine, and then you let me go home, whether or not they're guilty. And you get poor defendants who lose their jobs, they lose their homes, and they lose their children, all while awaiting trial, not ever having been convicted of anything.
yeah, yeah. Mm,
And so, what should we do about it? Well, we should eliminate cash bail for nonviolent crimes and use risk assessment tools to improve outcomes. Not
mm,
everybody needs to be locked up for making a mistake. I
mm,
think we should reserve prison for the more heinous crimes, violence.
mm.
Um,
Let me
you
ask you
know,
a question real quick. I think I have a problem with these demand-based economies when it comes to these circumstances. Like it seems like it's either private funds or public funds, and then those private and public funds come depending on demand of the system fought against budget or how much money they can
mhm,
generate. I think that's the problem in and of itself. I think if we calculated the need for the budget to support the system appropriately and allocated that money appropriately, we wouldn't hit these problems. You
true.
know, it's all the breakdown of the system from top to the bottom of this fight between what's needed versus what we want to offer ultimately. One might say what we can offer because of budget constraints, but you know, here at least the dichotomy is the thing that conservatives like to do. They call austere budgets, right? Which is basically
Mhm.
let's cut off all this public funding so we can let the wealthy be more wealthy and they'll stimulate business and then we'll have employment and blah blah blah. That's you know, I'm trying to steelman their theory without making it look too horrendous, which I think it is inherently.
Yes, it
So
is. It absolutely is.
yeah, so I think
Well,
just flat budgeting would be better than all this demand based economy, you know.
yeah. Well, recently, Illinois um, revamped its cash bail system. Uh, and I'm not sure the particulars on it. Uh, I didn't look into it, but in 2017, New Jersey instituted some bail reform that reduced the pretrial jail population by 40% without increasing the crime.
Mm,
And to me, that just shows that if you give people a chance, when they've made a mistake, most of them are ready to take responsibility for it. Not saying they want to.
yeah.
Nobody wants to have punishments doled out on them. And the punishment part of our sentencing is standing up in front of a judge and receiving your sentence and being publicly humiliated.
Mm, mm,
That's that's how it feels. And that should be where punishment ends. Is you publicly taking responsibility for breaking the law. And then everything after that should be rehab.
yeah.
and
And
learning
consider
life
why did they
skills.
break? Yeah, consider heavier. Why did they break the law, right?
Exactly.
I mean, I have
But the
just a quick anecdote. My daughter has a friend who is, their parents are very strict on them. They're out of school. They're not college educated. They do art. They do theater. Don't make a whole ton of money. They go work in random jobs, but their parents charge them a lot of rent to stay just in that home with them, and they're often food and drink insecure. So they were let go from a job because they were taking drinks from stealing, but little do they know or care that this person is probably starving.
right,
So
exactly.
and they're such a nice person. So the whole thing is just to me ridiculous. I don't, that's the whole thing I
Uh,
don't get. I'm like, some people really think if it comes down to dying or stealing something to survive, that you would opt to die. I don't think so. I don't think often that would be the choice. I think that would be a very a rare choice, if anything. But
I would say that that choice has never been made and opted to die. That's always anyone faced with that decision has opted to steal
yeah, when you're in a
because
desperate situation, you take desperate action.
yeah, we have a
Yeah.
large self preservation drive. It's innate in us. It's in our reptile brain, if you will, and it's not something that's easily overcome. And for humanity's prosperity, it's not something that should be overcome.
Mm, mm. And it's these notions I think that are forgotten that give us such harsh. I mean, we've talked about this before. I think a lot of our harsh punishments in our legal system come from historical roots in Puritan ideals, ideology, which is very harshly judgmental about what God thinks you should do. And that's why laws early on were like hell on earth, but they're getting better now,
Yeah,
but we're still stuck in the weeds somewhere there. Um, so I'm glad
yeah, I definitely
people like who are in science are getting people around to what we know scientifically to say, maybe we shouldn't treat these people so harshly. Um,
true. True. I don't understand the mindset of when someone breaks a law, then they must be treated like they're subhuman. But there
yeah,
are many, many people who have that opinion. Lock them up, but don't lock them up in anything that's livable. Don't make sure they're comfortable. Give them very bad food to eat and just punish, 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 punish 365 days a year for whatever their sentence is.
yeah.
Where's the humanity there? We
Well,
don't treat our animals that way, even the ones we eat.
yeah. It also makes sense that it heavily focuses on minorities because of probably racism and xenophobia, you know.
Oh, yeah. There's tons of institutional racism written into our laws, and those biases are in our law enforcement.
Yeah. Mm.
And it's generational. You know, it's taught. Nobody's born a racist.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
But we touched on something earlier I'd like to move to now, and that's criminal records as a permanent barrier. Um, Even for a single nonviolent offense, like the gentleman I spoke about earlier, who grew marijuana, um, he can't find housing, he can't find work, he can't go to certain colleges and universities to further his education, all because he has a criminal record. And that's counterintuitive. It creates a permanent underclass of former offenders. You're once a con, always a con.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it increases the likelihood of reoffending due to lack of opportunity. We just spoke about this. If you're in a desperate situation and you need to break the law to survive, chances are you're going to. And
Yeah.
so, saddling somebody with a permanent record that provides all these barriers to minimum basic needs. In some states, we spoke about this pre show. If you have a criminal drug conviction, you can't even get food stamps
Yeah.
or Medicaid.
I think
And
we.
so
Oh, sorry. Good. I'm sorry.
it's like those states say you make one mistake, and if it's in this category of mistake that really doesn't hurt anyone else, and we're just going to turn our back on you, and you just do whatever you can within these specific laws that you now have to follow. Like you can't possess a firearm, so you can't hunt to feed yourself. Um, you can't fish without buying a license. You can't buy a license without money. You can't get money without a job, and you can't get a job with a criminal record.
Yeah, they do seem reverberative, self-fulfilling prophecies, feedback loops, if you will. Just like being rich.
Hmm.
If you get once you get
Yeah.
money, it's easier to make money. Um,
Oh yeah.
two ends of the spectrum there. To be fair
Absolutely.
though, I want to call out something because this is where the opposite party would take an approach and say, like sometimes in some places and sometimes and in some areas that are maybe culturally resounding or maybe not, maybe just crime somehow becomes part of the culture.
Yes.
And then crime is done for the sake of crime, for the sake of easy money, for the sake of exploiting others. So
Or
there
even
is,
reputation.
yeah, so there is a malignancy there, but I got to tell you, I don't see that any more malignant than the people at the top of our economy who want to take advantage of the rest of the people for their own purposes. Um,
Absolutely, it's
this
equal.
is yeah, this is where it breaks down the notions of what we consider legal and illegal. It's legal because they're rich and they have enough money and power to get away with it, and they
Hmm.
have the ability to work in the system appropriately.
Right.
Um, so, did, anyways, did you have anything else you wanted to go into on us? Asked a question. Maybe we can entertain it if you unless you have something else you want to say.
Okay, I just have three more points that I have written out, and we can go over them pretty quickly because I'm anxious to get to questions. I like that.
Yeah, I'm in no rush, man. Take your time.
All
We'll
right.
figure this out.
Well, we touched on it already, and that's over policing and racial bias. They're inherent in our laws as they're written today. And minority communities are disproportionately policed and sentenced, especially for identical offenses committed by white individuals. And let's use cannabis again as that yardstick. Um, Cannabis is used by African Americans or black individuals at the same rate, almost exactly, as it is used by whites. Yet the incarceration rate is 2 to 3 times for black individuals or African Americans as it is for white people who commit the same offense, even in the same cities. And if that's not institutional racism, over policing, and bias, then I don't think anything is. So, what do we need? What would fix this? Well, we need community based policing and bias training. And along with reforming the stop and frisk and use of force policies to rebuild trust in law enforcement and in communities. I'm ex law enforcement. I don't trust cops. If I get pulled over today, the first thing I reach for is my phone to hit record.
Mm,
We shouldn't feel that way. That's not, in my views, that's not the American ideal. We're not supposed to be afraid of our cops.
mm,
I was taught
mm,
by my parents as a child, if you're in trouble, run to a cop. We don't teach our children that anymore.
mm, mm.
Then that's sad.
Yeah.
It's an indictment.
I'm a big fan of,
Um,
the idea of using a frontline force when appropriate instead of maybe law enforcement. Someone who is trained in de escalation, someone who's trained in psychology, someone who's trained in, you know, um, particular scenarios that might be psychological in nature and can be
yes.
handled appropriately. I'm all for mixing those two if possible, like if police officers can be both those things.
Mm,
I'm not against that necessarily, but something about an authority figure is already presenting an opposition in a sense. So at least if they were the authority figure, they wouldn't be presented as such necessarily. To make
right.
de-escalation a little bit easier. So I'm a fan of those types of scenarios.
I would like to think of uh, two separate. police forces, one made up of therapists and mental health professionals that did not carry arms,
Yeah, yeah.
and
Possibly,
then
yeah.
a force that, when needed, does carry arms.
Yeah, yeah.
Because there's no need for a gun for expired tags.
Yeah,
You don't need a taser when somebody's taillight is out.
yeah, yeah.
You do need those things for um, hostage standoffs. You need those for domestic violence calls.
Yeah, we're not going to
Um,
send therapists into an active shootout. Yes.
yeah, you know, uh, we're sending force people to mental health crises, and it ends up with the victim being what would have been considered the offender. Too many people, even one person, losing their life due to a badly trained cop
Yeah,
with an itchy trigger finger is too many.
I agree. What is that saying? They say
And
I'd rather let 100 people go than kill one person or make one person unjustly, you know, acted upon, something like that.
yep, yeah, absolutely. And my next 2 points, real quick, are probation and parole violations. They cost state billions. It just doesn't work. People are reincarcerated for things like technical violations, so they miss their appointment. The gentleman I was referring to earlier actually stopped going to his probation office because his probation officer told him to report every day there at 8 a.m.
Mm,
He had a job 2 hours away that started at 9 a.m.
mm. Yeah, that's ridiculous.
So she was going to cause him to lose his job, a job which by losing would have been a technical violation that could have put him in prison.
Hmm.
And so he made the choice to break his parole anyway before she could. Now, luckily, it turned out she was doing all of her parole and probationers this way. It was considered unfair, it was against policy, and she was removed from the position. But what about all of those out there that are doing that and their higher ups are supporting it instead of condemning it?
Mm,
And then last is the mental health and substance abuse neglect. When you're incarcerated, they're the prisons are now the largest providers of mental health care in the country, and they're all ill equipped for it. Inmates with mental illnesses or addictions, they don't get the treatments that they need that would be helpful. A lot of them are being forced to use treatments that violate their own personal rights. For example, I know of several cases. I can't quote the Supreme Court statutes right now, but there was a gentleman in, I believe, Kentucky who was an atheist who was sentenced to prison and required to go through a 12-step program for alcoholism before he could be released. AA requires you to submit your life to a higher power, though they
yeah.
don't name any specific religion.
Hmm.
This atheist did not believe in any higher power whatsoever, but was required to admit and submit to one
Mm,
in order to get parole.
hmm.
And he sued and he won. And so secular options were made available in Kentucky. And those secular options statistically perform better.
Hmm.
And like you said, it's a circle, it's a cycle of incarceration continues when you don't address these root causes.
Mm,
And what we could do instead is diversion programs such as mental health courts or drug courts and offer treatment in lieu of incarceration. And we can lower recidivism rates by up to 40%, according to Rand. Was it Rand? Yeah, the Rand Corporation. So, those are the points that I really wanted to talk about today and delve into. And I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to do that here and sharing your stories of your time.
mm, mm,
And so now, if we have any questions, I'm ready to answer.
mm. Well, thank you too. It was fascinating. I think we could probably go more and deeper. Maybe we'll do a part two. Um,
Sure.
but we can obviously we've covered cannabis a lot, and we could probably do one on that too. So yeah, Anas had some questions here. I'll just read them off real quick. I'll read them off and then maybe we can take it apart at a time. I don't know. It says it depends on the laws. There are laws created to dominate people or nations. It says one, what about unjust laws? And two, what might have been our responsibilities while the majority of people are ignorant, hypocrites, transgressors, or at least messy. I think I
Mm.
can extract some stuff from that. And I think kind of I did a little bit. Would you agree, Anas? Meaning that we do have parts of the society who have crime has become part of their culture. So now it's no longer crime necessarily because of direct circumstances of which, you know, made them act out of desperation. It's no longer desperation. It's preserving some form of power dynamic. And that power dynamic might be specifically against engaging with the powers that be or engaging in opposition to the powers that be. And there's probably any degree of people in between that spectrum, who sometimes ride the lines of being illegal or not. It's like we said earlier, it's only illegal if you get caught, right? Otherwise, it's not illegal. So that seems to be the general theme of things is what you can get away with generally. I think there are people who act in their lives that don't just do things just to get away with it. But there are obviously people who do, who live their lives very much like how much I can get away with. And some of them fall off into the criminal justice system, I think is what ends
Hmm.
up happening. Does all that make sense? Does that answer any of your questions there? Do you have any other questions?
If you don't mind, I'd like to invite Anas up here to speak. I'd like him to expand on his first question and maybe get a little more specific.
Absolutely. It'd be up to him if he wanted to come up here, or
Sure.
Nargis too. I'd be willing to have either one of you. Come on up. Nargis, do you want to come up? Anyways, Anas, you have the floor. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah. Hi everyone. How's it going?
Hello.
Doing well.
Nice to see you.
Yeah. First, a question about the unjust laws. How to adhere with that if we have an evidence about injustice.
Well,
Mm, yeah, go ahead, Don.
I would say that many of the laws in the United States are unjust, going from property laws to drug laws to even stand your ground laws and castle doctrine. Um, Specifically, those last two, I don't think anyone's TV or Tesla is worth anyone else's life. Life is precious, irreplaceable, and unique to every individual. And to value mass marketed, easily replaceable material possessions over life um, is an error in thinking,
Mm.
in my opinion.
And
Uh,
does that also,
so
do you mean that in both ways of like number one, say somebody trashes something of your stuff, that doesn't give you the right to kill someone, or number two, throwing away your life is kind of equivalent to uh, being put in jail because essentially you're kind of lost to society at that point, and it's very few of them make it back out of that system. Is that kind of where you're going with that?
it is. It is. Once introduced to the system, as it's often referred to, you never get out of it ever. Even misdemeanor convictions that fall off your record after 7 years, those news stories are still there and they're
Mm,
online and they're there forever.
mm,
And so, and you can do a people search. Oh, well, you're John Brown and you lived in Pensacola, Florida. Well, look, here's a John Brown that was arrested for marijuana possession in Pensacola, Florida. And it was a misdemeanor amount, but I'm not going to rent to you because now I know you use marijuana.
Mm, mm, mm.
And so, yeah, saddling somebody with a record, lifelong record, or for something so minor, um, is well, it's unfair,
Yeah.
and it definitely uh, affects the poor more than the well-off or the wealthy. We do have expungement and sealing records in the U.S., but it's a very expensive process in most states,
Mm.
and something that's not available to people who are living paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah, I want to call out one thing. You and I are talking mostly about these systems in the United States. Some people may not be coming from the United States and may have a different perspective from wherever they come from. So, Anas, did any of that cover anything that you were asking, or do you have any other questions?
Yeah, there's a question comes to my mind only about people break the rule and break the laws and something like that. What about if we have unjust laws? So I need to break it because I see it unjust
I see what you're
based
saying.
on my religion,
Mm,
based on my based on my religion, based on my cognitive notions.
mm, mm.
Okay, I understand a little more now. So you're talking about what is that?
Like if you
Yeah, you find
if
the
you
laws
yeah, if you
just.
find laws in unjust, what do you do if you find laws unjust? Do you break them or do you go with the unjust laws?
Oh, there's a term for that. It's escaping me at the moment because that now is when I need it. So that makes sense.
Vigilantism, maybe, or revolution, maybe, or down with the man,
Yeah, something like
fighting
that.
against the system. Bulls on parade.
Oh,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
well, for example, there's a legal theory that most law and order types in America try to tamp down, and that's jury nullification.
Mm,
And that's one that I would propose that people who found themselves on the jury for somebody who committed a crime of possessing marijuana, I would ask them to consider voting not guilty, even if you think he's guilty in a jury trial, because the law isn't one that should exist. And so we have jury nullification, and there's another term for um, purposefully breaking a law that you don't feel is just. And I don't remember that term right now, but I've engaged in that as well. When seatbelt laws were first introduced in my state, I purposefully did not wear them and got several tickets for it as a form of protest. Of course, my bank account then told me
your
to
bank account
stop protesting.
protested too. Yeah.
Yes. And so, yeah, is that a moral right um, and good um, to break a law you don't agree with? Well, it would depend on your justification. I would say, and I don't mean to offend, but I would say that if your justification is religious, then maybe that's not where you should be placing your justification. If you can have, like I do with cannabis laws, if your opinion is backed up with real world fact, with demonstrable uh, support, then yes, you have a moral right, maybe even a moral duty to defy that law, like the gentleman who planted the weed that I talked about earlier. He didn't agree that it should have been illegal. He had an economic incentive for breaking the law, um, and he accepted his punishment when he knew he broke the law. So if someone can qualify it with those concrete things, you know you're doing it and you're going to accept your consequences. You have good real world foundations for it, then yeah. But I would say, for example, there are fundamentalists in every religion, and some religions would advocate for taking rights away from others simply for not believing.
Mm,
And in a case like that, I wouldn't support that to be a good reasoning behind breaking a law that you didn't agree with.
mm, mm, mm.
But ones that cause social harm, ones that you can show harm everyone, no matter what their circumstances are, except for money. In America and in a lot of places, if you have enough money, nothing's illegal.
Generally, yeah. I would say that they do make examples of people who try to get away with that sometimes. But
Mhm.
generally, I think it does just take money here to get away with a whole lot of crap that people shouldn't be able to get away with. As far
Agreed.
as for me, as far as laws that seem unjust, I think the only thing I can say there is everybody knows there's consequences with breaking laws, depending on how powerful the powers that be are. It's just a matter of magnitude what those consequences end up being. In a system like ours, you generally have these ranges of consequences, and they can go from minimal to maximal, depending on if a judge wants to make an example of you, for instance, or maybe you are just a horrible human being and you've done a lot of bad stuff. Um,
Exactly.
so yeah, it's the consequences. Those are the only real shoulds or oughts that I think have bridged the is ought gap are the things that we've codified in law, because you can say I ought do this, if I don't, I suffer consequences. So that's the problem that I see there. Um, Anas, did you have anything else you wanted to say? I wanted to also bring up Nargiz's point because I think at least what I read so far is very apt, and I have personal examples to back that up too. So, did you want to say anything else, Anas?
No, no, thank you.
Mm, cool.
Well, thanks for your
Thank,
questions. I
thank you
really
very much.
appreciate them.
Yeah, awesome stuff. Um, so Nargis said there are people that commit crimes just to get back to jail and get a roof on their heads and free meal. Imagining prisons in Norway provided with TV, internet, and all basic comfort. Wouldn't it lead to more homeless people misusing generosity of the government, losing any motivation they could have had to make efforts to meet their needs themselves? How to avoid that? Also, criminals might feel less threatened as the punishment doesn't really look so harsh. Okay, so there's a lot there. I wanna break this down. The first part, the people that commit crimes and go back to jail to get a roof on their heads and a free meal, I've witnessed this. It's a thing. Homeless people who just go kick in cops' doors because they want 3 hots and a cot for a couple nights, whatever it is. So that's absolutely a phenomenon. Um, I think. What do you think about that, Don, Anas?
Don just stepped away. He'll be right back in just a couple of seconds.
Okay, he'll be right back with you. Anas, anything there? Um, I could, that. Yeah, I agree. That's a thing. I've witnessed it being working in the criminal justice system myself, even for such a short time. It was under a year, I think. Imagining prisons in Norway provided with TV, internet, all the basic comfort. Wouldn't that lead for more homeless people misusing generosity of the government? Losing any motivation they could to have make efforts to meet their needs themselves. How to avoid that? So the only thing I think I can say to that is the evidence seems to be in the contrary. Um, the evidence seems to be that they have much less recidivism um, because the punishments are less harsh. People are treated humanely. They get decent living conditions. They're controlled. I'm sure they have their problems. Um, but the statistics kind of play out to say that this process works. Will there be people who will take advantage of the system? I think that's unavoidable. I think that's unavoidable in any system. No system cannot be capitalized on in some way. It's a matter of a society, in my opinion, to detect that and to try and squelch it, make something to gauge against it. Um,
Right. Sorry, I
but
stepped away there for a second. Nature hit me with an emergency.
that happens, man. No worries, especially at our ages. So
So, yeah, well, let's look at Norway and your example. That does make sense. You know, if I'm homeless, but all I have to do is maybe rob somebody, and I can get a couple of years with a bed and internet and television and education and things like that. That does intuitively sound a lot better. So who wouldn't take advantage of that? But what Norway does is they make sure that their citizens have comprehensive access to education, universal health care. They get income support through various Social Security benefits, and they're typically conditional, requiring recipients to meet specific criteria. Like they have to be actively seeking employment, they have to comply with legal obligations, they have to participate in elections and pay their taxes. And so there are a lot of other programs that the Norwegian government institutes that support their citizens that keep them from having an economic reason to turn to crime. And so even
exactly.
those who live in homelessness um, due to mental illness or lack of opportunity, they're still really well supported. Whereas here in America, if, for example, you could have a dental emergency and not be able to get it taken care of, and that's going to cost you lost work. It could even cost you a job if you have to take off a lot of time because you're just hurting so badly that you can't function. And so, if we had universal health care where everyone was healthy enough to work and could maintain that health, that opens up economic opportunities for people just because they're healthy enough to use them. And so, we could start there. But most property crime are economically motivated. They did it because they needed to.
Yeah,
They
agreed.
did it because it was the only way they could get ahead. They did it because there's no jobs in the area. So if we would institute something like a universal basic income or housing and health care as a right to where everybody had a place to go, everybody could see a doctor, everybody could get those wisdom teeth out, we would have a more productive society and we would see a lot less crime.
Funny thing is, even from a economic standpoint in which I disagree with, I'm very anti-capitalist, but there are benefits to a heavy capitalist driven society to those notions of making sure people are healthily involved in the economy and have money to spend, because money to spend means demand, which means there's demand for supply, which means, it's all that economy 101 stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but that's just seems to be not, at least here, not the interests. The interests are in a few and maintaining the system just so they can maintain power, and it's that what can I get away with attitude again.
Right.
So
I think it is a matter of mindset as well, because our purpose in life not only to feed ourselves based on the Maslow's. Now, the first one, the security, and then food or something like that, and then security and belonging and everything will be developed. Our needs based on our levels in life.
mm,
So the responsibility, I think, it will be on the shoulder of the people itself and the government.
It is. It's going to take a change of heart. It's going to take a change of thinking for the peoples of any country to fix the problems in their criminal justice systems. America doesn't have a monopoly on it, but it's the one I'm most familiar with. And a lot of these ideas that I've put forth today are universal. If you treat someone who's made a mistake, and that's what all crimes are mistakes, in my opinion. Even if you didn't, or you did know that it was wrong to do it, and you did it anyway, the motivation behind it is going to show you where the flaw in your thinking was. The gentleman who grew the marijuana and got arrested for it did it for economic reasons. He didn't want to buy it anymore. That's what he told me. And I don't have any reason to doubt him.
Mm.
And so, what was his reason? His reason was economic. He didn't agree that it should have been illegal ever to begin with. And so he protested against it that way, made a mistake.
Mm.
But his mistake was economically driven, and the economic problem was in part caused by the prohibition of the plant.
Mm.
Um, Marijuana was first made illegal by the same people who were enforcing prohibition of alcohol. And when they saw that their government agency was going to be wiped out, they were going to lose their job. They used racism, they used cotton, they used fossil fuel industry to demonize the marijuana plant, the cannabis plant. And so he kept his job, economics. He uh, gave boosts to cotton, fossil fuels, and textiles, economics. And when you look at all these things and they keep pointing back to that dollar sign, it makes sense to me that a stronger economy propped up by the government that collects so many taxes uh, would happen without prohibition of any sort.
Mm.
When I was with law enforcement, I joined an agency and trained to be a public speaker with LEAP, LEAP, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. And our platform is no drug should be illegal to possess or use, that addiction is not a criminal offense, it's a mental health problem.
Mm.
So it shouldn't be handled by cops, it should be handled by doctors and nurses.
Mm. I agree with that. Anas, did that cover your question? I'm not certain.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Great. Well, I can go about 10 or so more minutes if you guys want to, and then I've got something coming up.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we can cut this off at any point now. This has been a great conversation. So I think.
Yeah, it
I've
was. Yeah.
really enjoyed myself.
Mm. All right. Well, this seems like a good place to cut it off unless anyone. Oh, I wanted to mention institutionalized because I think that's another thing that like is along those lines of people do become institutionalized. You know, they become comfortable in the system.
Mm-hmm.
And that goes along the same lines as what Nargiz was saying about people who will take advantage of the system. I'm not certain if that's taking advantage or if that's just a mental coping mechanism, maybe to be in a comfortable place. We see it all the time in prisons, people who just get so comfortable in prison. That was actually one of the themes of the story of Shawshank Redemption was how people become institutionalized.
Old
So
Brooks.
and so even if we have all right, we're never going to have perfect systems, but if even if we have, say, more like the Scandinavian systems, people are still going to get institutionalized in them. They're not going to want to leave. They're
Yes.
comfortable, these are all given human behaviors, I think. And I don't know if there's any solution for that necessarily besides I like motivations personally. Get barriers out of people's way. If people choose to leave because of such and such and they want to do such and such, let them leave and let them go do such and such. Doesn't matter what it is. Don't say, well, why do you want to do such and such? Because such and such is something that you shouldn't be doing. It's all this judgment that comes along with it and the barriers that we set up for people to achieve the things that they want to do within their own understanding of their own potentials.
Right.
We see these in behaviors like I'll just do a quick example like In the UK, they started implementing these things called drug rooms, which are rooms where people can safely do drugs, right?
Uh-huh.
One might think, well, geez, why would we want them to do drugs? Well, we don't necessarily, but showing the ability to make a proper choice to go do drugs in a more healthy environment is a positive choice. Why not reinforce that positive choice? Why not keep reinforcing these positive choices? And it seems to work. It seems if we give people dignity and autonomy and stop judging them for the choices that they make rather than giving them better options and better choices in their lives, that's what leads to better outcomes. But
Yeah.
it's this whole judgmental culture we have built in because of whatever reason. I won't go down that because that's a whole other topic. But anyways, any last comments from anyone?
Yeah, I read about this Norway prison, and there is a program about this. There is a psychologist that will sit with any any prisoners. So then they will go through this program and this rehabilitation system, and everyone get in this prison, then come out, get out from the prison as has the profession, and go to the life in positive way.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So positive outcomes. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I think, it's the problem that with every system, there's always going to be negatives, and it's the people who want to focus on those negatives and say, no, the system is wrong because of these negatives. I don't like it. This is what I know. This is comfortable. Um, I like taking advantage of people. Anywhere in those spectrum of.
Imagine this prison, this prison. It was better than my home.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
That's a pretty clear choice, I think, right?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah. Mm.
but at the end they have this outcome. They will go with the life in positive way, because
Yeah.
our purpose in life not and get with get in with the four walls.
Yeah.
We have to
Mm.
be productive. We have to be innovative and creative people.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yes.
Mm. Mm.
If we are raising these ideas in the mindset, I think everyone will take aware about this, because this is our purpose. This is our responsibility.
Mm. 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 Is this kind of back in the realm of
Mm.
self-awareness,
Yeah, yeah.
self-regulation? Yeah, I think those are good things to teach people when, especially people who are in such strife in their life, who've experienced such harsh things. I find sometimes, like I'll encounter some people in here on Discord that are just in really bad places, and if I just give them the dignity of their stance and just say, yeah, what you're feeling is valid. There's nobody who can invalidate your feelings. Many people will try, but you know, if you just give them those opportunities, it helps. I think it's almost incontrovertible in my opinion because I've not witnessed anything opposite yet. Um, yeah, so it just goes back to some basic tenets to me of dignity, of giving everybody an inalienable dignity, and understanding we've all been through some shit.
Mm. Right.
So yeah. Mm.
I think nowadays we have a disruptive phenomena about the AI. Now
Mm.
AI will take over these teachers, scholars, and everyone that will teach you in everywhere.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
So I see it in positive way.
Mm. Yeah, well, there are also thoughts that AI may bring together a better criminal justice system, a more even criminal justice system. I don't know what the possibilities of that are because I think anywhere you insert humans, you're going to start to insert flaws. Um,
Yeah.
and I think we even have examples of this. One other person I knew lived in, I think maybe the Netherlands, knows Denmark, something like that. But the government used AI in order to levy some situations that needed to be resolved, and it ended up resorting around like housing, if somebody deserved housing or not. And AI just went blitz on people and just started kicking people out of houses. And it just went totally the wrong way you might expect it to go. But then again, the people who made it probably wanted that to happen that way. So, because then there's more opportunities for them to capitalize on people's poor circumstances. So yeah, it's all interesting stuff. But AI is a whole other
Every
topic,
tool,
man.
yeah, every tools and techniques that we have in life, it is a double sword edge tool that you can use it in positive way or negative way
Negative
based
way,
on
yep,
your mindset.
exactly.
Yeah.
So far,
Now,
I don't think
nowadays,
now if we come up
ChatGPT.
with, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, man.
Yeah. Nowadays we have ChatGPT and these DeepSeek and any other tools and techniques that help us to think,
Mm,
to have the big picture about what we are talking about. For example, if we can discuss some topic, I can discuss it with the ChatGPT first and come out in a public speaking or something in a good topic.
hmm hmm Yeah, I definitely think AI has its utility. I know people who are very anti-AI. One of the guys I interviewed on here is very anti-AI. But I think I think I agree with you that there's going to be positives and negatives with every kind of advancement or innovation, which draws on another topic we did a show on. Um, Interruptive innovation. Um, but AGI was the area I was going to say. Like AGI might be that place that if we ever reach a general autonomous intelligence that can act upon its own accord and take in the information and make its own judgments based on that information, that's separated from human intention, maybe that. I mean, that's all speculative. I don't know if we can ever really get there. I don't even know if we're maybe probably on our way there. But AI is a whole other topic. We could do a whole show on AI too, probably. So, and I'm happy to do that. So,
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, it's a good topic, and we can broaden our knowledge about this.
well, maybe you and me on us. Would you like to do a show with me on AI?
No, 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 no.
No,
I
no.
hope to listen as well.
Oh, okay. Well, all right. Well, consider it. But I'd be happy to do a show again.
There, there is, there is, there is many people better than me.
It's all right. I'm not a specialist either, but I can talk about it. But anyways, you consider it maybe. Don, anything else?
Yes.
I'd just like to leave everybody with one little thought, and that is when you come across someone in your personal life or your professional life that has a criminal record, remember it's a result of a bad decision. It's not necessarily the result of a bad or a flawed person. And whoever that may be, they deserve dignity, they deserve respect, and they're not a bad person. And stop treating them that way.
Yeah, I can join on that. Anybody else?
Yeah, yeah, totally.
Little inside joke there.
I think Brian Tracy about in his book No Excuses. I think he's measured that to talk with the people like they are $1 million.
Mm. Yeah, treat them well. Treat them with.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think that's what. Yeah. So. All right. Well, I'm going to end the stream. Thank you so much. It was an awesome conversation today. Thank you for anyone who paid
Yeah.
attention and listened. Thank you, Anas and Nargis, for being here. Thank you, Don. You the man as usual.